Good afternoon. My name is Camila Carvalho. I am a PhD student at Federal Fluminense University in Rio, Brazil, and I'm a visiting PhD student at Birkbeck. My PhD thesis is on scales of inequality in Brazilian cities. I'm interested in understanding if inequality is a phenomenon that crosses urban scales, such as metropolitan areas, municipalities, and neighborhoods. Today, I will present the preliminary results of one chapter that focuses on informal settlements, or the so-called favelas in Brazil. This chapter aims to explore inequality patterns within the biggest Brazilian favelas. So I would like to start my presentation by talking about the inequality context in the country. Then I will talk about the methods proposed. After that, I will explore the characteristics of inequality at scale using the Rio's metropolitan area. And then I will show you the preliminary results for favelas in Rio, and I will finalize with the preliminary conclusion and future work. First of all, it's important to note that Brazil is one of the most unequal countries in the world. According to the World Inequality Database, the top 1% of households received 29% of income, which puts Brazil in one of the highest positions of inequality ranking. This income inequality shapes the Brazilian city landscapes, shapes Brazilian cities especially. These urban landscapes showing luxury condoms side by side to informal settlements are widespread in Brazilian cities. And here we have some examples for cities of Rio, São Paulo, Belém, Fortaleza. And this shows that many cities in Brazil share this pattern of inequality. So this kind of cities image, this kind of urban landscapes are very common in our imaginary of Latin American cities in general. And those images are very important to illustrate how inequality is spatialized. But in my work, I'm concerned with a kind of inequality overlooked in urban studies literature, especially when using spatial analysis methods, which I'm calling of microscale inequality. And in this case, I'm looking at favelas in Brazil or informal settlements. Favelas, by the way, are informal settlements established in unclaimed lands within or near city, or also in peripheral areas. Generally, they suffer from the lack of basic public utilities and social services. And in common sense, they are seen as a place of poverty. The country's largest favelas have tens of thousands of inhabitants, which makes them more populous than most of municipalities in Brazil. To illustrate this small-scale segregation, let me show you some pictures from Rocinha. Rocinha is one of the biggest Brazilian favelas with 70,000 inhabitants, according to the latest available census. And these two images show a very precarious urban landscape with poor sanitation and poor waste collection. Also, Rocinha has one of the highest rates of tuberculosis in Brazil, which is a disease very associated with the lack of basic sanitation. But these other two images are also from Rocinha. Here we can see a very different picture with a much better condition of urban utilities and services. And as other qualitative methods studies already showed in Brazil, favelas are not homogeneous places, but regions with a complex residential mix. So within this context, This study aims to investigate the inequality within favelas or informal settlements in Brazil, comparing with the city-scale inequality. My hypothesis is that favelas present internal social spatial inequalities patterns akin to those found in the city as a whole. And I have two main research questions. The first one is, this manipulation of the extent of geospatial data bear our understanding of poverty pockets? And the second one is, can such a scale-sensitive approach improve the spatial targeting of public policies? That is a topic I'm very interested in discuss. To address these questions, it is important to clarify what I am understanding by scale. There are different concepts of scales, as many publications on GIS already discussed. But in a general way, there are three main definitions. That is the cartographic scale, the scale as an extension, and scale as resolution. And here I am using scale as extension because I'm trying to understand how the extension manipulation changes the homogeneity of certain areas. So I'm working with this approach of scale. My method, this is a working in progress, so I'm still working on a method, but here I have 5 steps. I'm looking for improvements, and so if you have any suggestions, I will be happy to hear them. But here I have 5 steps, and the first idea is to understand inequality at city scale. So I'm working with some general statistics to understand inequality and the relevant variables at city scale. Then the idea is to understand spatial income inequality at city scale. So I'm working with Moranzai for income to assess the clusters of income. Then I am selecting the biggest favelas in Brazil with more than 30 census tracts. Then I will apply Moranzai and local indicator of spatial association in selected favelas. And in the end, I will calculate some urban attributes to each cluster, such as the proximity to public services, and the access to public utilities and distance to the neighborhood center. To understand what I'm calling as a city scale inequality, let me show you some correlation analysis. I did this analysis for Rio. Today I'm working with different cities in Brazil, but I'm still working on, so today I will show you the results only for Rio. And here I have this correlation, this correlation analysis. And the idea here is to understand how inequality is expressed in Rio and which variables are correlated with income at city scale to then explore it at favela scale. Here I want to highlight some relationships between those variables. And first of all, there is a very strong positive correlation between income and white people. Of 0.85, showing that the higher the income, the higher is the proportion of white people. Also, there are a moderate negative correlation between income and distance to CBD, showing that the closer to the city center, the higher is the income. And also moderate negative correlation between distance to CBD and public utilities, such as water and sewage access network, which means that people living closer to the CBD have better public utilities. Now, Then I look at the spatial inequality applying Moranzai in Rio's metropolitan area. Here I applied the local indicator of spatial association for per capita income, and it identifies statistically significant clusters in the data set. And let me zoom in on, here we can see a very strong separation between the high cluster and the low cluster. That's more peripheral. But I want to zoom in on this part of the city because here we can see some favelas, and in these black boundaries are for these favelas. And here we can see that favelas are in low clusters and low-high clusters, which means that these areas are generally homogeneous areas of poverty at this scale, at the city scale. Now I started to look at the favelas, and here I selected the favelas made up by at least 30 contiguous census tracts. Then I applied Moranzai in each area, and just for make clear, positive values imply that there is a spatial autocorrelation. I found that most cases have a positive spatial correlation. And then I select the areas with Moranzai higher than 0.3, and I found 17 areas. Here I am showing the results for Rio, and I have 5 cases in Rio with Moranzai higher than 0.3. And here also we can see a clear separation between the clusters of higher income in dark blue and in clusters of lower income in red. And then I calculated the distance of each census tract to the closest school and healthcare unit. And in general, I can say that the high group is closer to the schools in average 114 meters than the low cluster. And also the high cluster is 174 meters in average closer to the healthcare units than the low clusters. So in general, the high clusters are closer to these public services. I also analyzed the correspondence between neighborhood center and the higher income clusters. And here I calculate the neighborhood center through the hotspot of the density of services such as shops, and which will be equivalent to the high streets in England. And I'm still working on a method here, but in general, it seems to have a strong spatial correspondence between high clusters and the neighborhood center, as we can see on these images. Here, the black areas are the neighborhood center, and the blue are the high clusters. And now I analyze the income difference between clusters and the general mean, considering all the census tracts. We can see that in some cases, here for the per capita income, we can see the difference of more than 100 Brazilian reais, which is the Brazilian currency. And this difference is a considerable amount among the poorest. Here I'm looking at the proportion of white people, and also we can see that the higher income clusters have a higher proportion of white people, which is a pattern similar to that found at its scale that I showed in that correlation analysis. Also, when you look to access to sewage network and to waste collection, we can say that in general, lower income clusters have a worse access to sewage network, and to waste collection. In conclusion, these preliminary results suggest that favelas are internally unequal to a significant degree, with better off clusters supported by better urban facilities and higher levels of public investments. And the idea here is, as one zooms in on a neighborhood of similar income values, such as favelas or informal settlements, significant variation can be found between those adjacent spatial units, showing that inequality is a phenomenon that replicated across urban scales. Also, it's important that public policies consider the micro scale when targeting favelas to avoid reinforcing inequalities instead of mitigating them. So this is a topic that I'm very interested in, and I still have to do some further analysis on this. And as a future work, I have to analyze the other Brazilian favelas because I show it only the results for Rio. I want to explore other concepts of scales, such as resolution, to try to understand the MOP effects, because the size of the census tract is still very big to this analysis, to this small extension. Also, I want to associate with other variables such as topography to try to understand this physical dimension of inequality, which is a very important dimension in Brazil. And then discuss how urban projects can be improved by considering the micro-scale inequality in Brazil. So that's it. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Great, thank you, Camila, for a very interesting presentation. If you have questions, please type them out in the chat. So we have about 10 minutes for a discussion. I'll start. I was thinking about what you said about the presence of a public infrastructure in some parts of favelas that obviously creates significant inequality within the favela. And was that the result of planning and welfare projects? I remember under Lula a few years ago, there were a lot of these projects. And what was the logic of that?
Here I have to talk about, we have two kinds of public policies. One that is territorial, that is urban, focused on geographical areas, targeting on some geographical areas. And we have other that is cutting by income, and like Bolsa Familia, that was a project created by Lula to create income for the poorest people. So in this kind of geographical targeting policies, I'm still collecting more information about that, but I can say that there is some kind of concentration in the higher income areas, and in areas that already have better conditions of infrastructure and urban services. So I'm still collecting evidences of this, but as I think in a general way, we can see that it happens, and the problem is to reinforce inequalities, and we are not solving the problem, but we are reinforcing inequalities.
Yeah, as we wait for some questions from the audience, another aspect you touched upon is the classification of a location as favela or not. And I was wondering if you experimented with different definitions to see to what extent it varies. Because I would imagine that in the literature, there are different ways of classifying an area as an informal settlement or not. And I would imagine that there are a lot of areas that are on a spectrum between a fully formal settlement and a fully informal one.
Yeah, I'm using the classification of the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, that is the official data of favelas, but there is a lot of discussion. I mean, if this classification is good enough, and the many researchers argue that this is not a good classification because it does not consider a lot of areas that are very poor and with very bad infrastructure, but and consider only the point is that this is not the classification of Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics does count with all the areas that are in fact favelas. And that is another problem, that is the classification, this term favela. If we need of this idea of favela to understand the poorest areas, we can how can we what is favela? That is there are many discussions of what is favela and if this concept is good to understand the poverty in Brazil.
Great, thanks. Still no questions from the audience. Yeah, I'm really connecting the talks, what we talked about earlier with regard to Lebanon, and how good is the socioeconomic data in Brazil, particularly for informal settlements?
I'm using this census data, and I mean, we have problems, but I think they are doing a good work on favelas, because we have problems of the scale of the data, because one census tract has 300 households. That's a very big area, but regarding the income and infrastructure, I think the data it's good. I don't see any problem with that.
Okay, that's interesting, and that also makes me think that people in favelas must be willing to participate in this kind of surveys from the government.
Yeah, there is some initiatives like favelas doing its own service for to count population and count income. So I think it's good.
Great. So there are a couple of questions in the chat. One from Jonathan Alexander. Will the coronavirus have a big effect on the spread of your data and access to data?
No, I don't think so, because I'm working with census data, and I'm not collecting. This is not a field research, so I won't have a problem.
Okay, that's an easy answer. So another question from Paul Esner. Nice talk. Do you think that your results could be transferred to other countries? Yeah, and that hints to the fact that, of course, Brazil is a particular type of informal settlement. And so what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have this I'm interested in working with another countries such as Mexico and other countries that have you said right, is a very different kind of informal settlements, but we have some similarities. So I would like to compare these results using these census data from other countries, but I didn't have the opportunity to work with this, but it's something that I would like to do in future.